Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning and for participating in the training and for all your help in spreading the word and assisting your communities and individuals that are eligible to sign up for the FCC's Emergency Broadband Benefit. My name is Angie Cooper, and I'm with Heartland Forward. If you have not heard of us, Heartland Forward is what we call a policy think and do tank. Our mission is to help change the narrative about the middle of the country and kickstart economic growth. We do that, and we think it's important from an economic standpoint to look at opportunities around health and wellness, human capital and workforce development, regional economic competitiveness. One of our major initiatives that we launched earlier this year is called Connecting the Heartland to high-speed internet access. We've kicked our campaign off initially in 4 states in the Heartland, which include Arkansas, Ohio, Illinois, and Tennessee. And one of the initiatives in this campaign is to help spread the word and work with partners like the FCC and our state and local partners across our 4 states to spread the word for communities and eligible individuals to sign up for the Emergency Broadband Benefit. We know that the benefit program that has been rolled out by the FCC truly is an opportunity to jumpstart to closing the digital divide. We know affordability is one of the major significant reasons why people are not getting connected. But you know what? I do not need to tell all of you on this call that libraries are critical to helping us close the divide. And you have been on the front line helping communities and individuals having access from your facilities to internet when they needed it most. We've all lived through the past year and months to count of the pandemic and the impacts that we saw on schoolwork, on people signing up and searching for jobs, for all of us doing our jobs. And we know that many people came to our libraries in our communities to get that access. So we are pleased and so thankful that you are joining us today to learn more about the Emergency Broadband Benefit and to help spread the word in getting people signed up in those eligible households that can get that service. So I want to thank the American Library Association and their regional affiliates in the states that I mentioned earlier, Arkansas, Ohio, Illinois, and Tennessee. We have a great group of people that are joining us. We appreciate all the work that you do. I live 5 minutes from my library in Bentonville, Arkansas. So when I walk past the facility every single day, I see people going in and out. And just we thank you for the role that you're playing on this specific issue and many other issues that are having positive impacts for our community. So joining us today, we have Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosen-Worsel. We have her staff, Ed and Kayla, that will be answering questions and providing a few more details and what we'll be walking you through the training today of what the EBB program is and answer all your questions to ensure you have what you need so you can share that with your community. I also want to thank Jamie from USAC for your partnership and helping coordinate the call and in your engagement in today's discussion. Before I turn it over to the acting chairwoman, I have a couple of housekeeping things. I know we've all been on Zoom and we probably all can share these specific details, but I wanted to share this is being recorded and it's being recorded for purposes so we can continue to share. And if you need to watch again or look at certain items, you can do that. So the session is being recorded. We will open it up, like I mentioned earlier, for Q&A. So please feel free to use your chat button. Feel free to use your hand signal to raise your hand. We truly want this to be a discussion and we want to be able to answer questions as well as feedback, if you have it, based upon sort of what you're seeing in communities and what the questions you're receiving from individuals today in your libraries. And then just again, thank you so much for your partnership and for your engagement today. With that, I will hand it over to Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel.
Thank you so much, Angie. And a really big thank you to Heartland Forward for spending time, energy, and efforts addressing the digital divide. So look, there was a time before this pandemic when broadband was just nice to have. But look, now it's need to have for everyone, everywhere. Because life as we know it, so much of it has moved online. That includes healthcare, that includes education, that includes finding a job, that includes keeping a job. It is essential that we find a way to make sure every household in this country has access to consistent and reliable broadband service. And so much of the discussion to date has been about infrastructure. But when we study the data, we learn that as many as 3 times as many households are not online because they're struggling to afford it. And when we look at the economic crisis we've had during the last year as we've wrestled with this pandemic, we've got households that could use a little assistance to get online and stay online. And that's where the FCC's new Emergency Broadband Benefit program comes into play. It's a really big deal. It's the nation's largest ever broadband affordability program, and you're going to hear a lot more about it. But so much of this discussion, is about broadband infrastructure. But I want to relate it back to the social infrastructure of libraries. They are at the heart of so many of our communities. They help people get online, find information, get the facts they need. We have so many heroes in our libraries working to do that. And we believe if we can take advantage of that and get them engaged, they can also help get the word out about the Emergency Broadband Benefit. I think libraries, I think Andrew Carnegie called them palaces for the people, and that is absolutely true. But I also want to give a shout out to the librarians who work there. They're experts at figuring out how to make sure that people have access to information. And right now we'd like to work with them to help ensure they can get out information about the Emergency Broadband Benefit and get the households in their communities the support they might need to get broadband service at home. And with that, I'd like to pass on for more details to Ed Bartholomew from the FCC's Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, who's going to walk us through the basic facts of the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And I'm so glad that you're listening here today and can help us get the word out about this important program and help us address the digital divide.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Let me pull up a PowerPoint presentation that I want to share with you. So thank you, Acting Chairwoman Rosenworcel, and thank you, Angie and Heartland Forward and the ALA for getting us all together here today. We talked a little bit about the Emergency Broadband Benefit in the introduction, but the FCC has 2 programs that are going on right now to help people and connectivity and their connectivity needs during the pandemic. So we have 2 great programs, but they're 2 slightly different programs. And given the audience, given that you guys are librarians and one of those programs is specifically focused on libraries and schools, I wanted to spend a little bit of time making sure that you knew about those programs, but also making sure that you understand the difference between those 2 programs. So the chairwoman spoke about the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and that is a program that builds on the Lifeline program to provide connectivity and devices directly to qualifying households. And we're going to talk a lot about that in just a few minutes. But I briefly want to touch on the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And this is a program that builds on the E-rate program, which many of you as librarians are likely aware of. Your library or your district libraries may be making use of E-rate for connectivity sort of on campus. But the Emergency Connectivity Fund provide support to schools and libraries so that they can provide devices and connectivity to students, teachers, and patrons that lack access when they're off campus. So we'll start on that. The ECF, or the Emergency Connectivity Fund, is a $7.17 billion program that will help schools and libraries provide the tools and services their communities need for remote learning during the COVID-19 emergency period. ECF will help provide relief to millions of students, school staff, library patrons, and will help close the homework gap for students who lack access to the internet when they're at home or when they're off campus. And for eligible schools and libraries, the program will cover the reasonable costs of laptops and tablet computers, Wi-Fi hotspots, modems, routers, and broadband connectivity purchases. And again, this is for off-campus use by students, staff, and library patrons. Congress did authorize the Emergency Connectivity Fund as part of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So who's eligible? Schools, libraries, and consortia of schools and libraries, and that's sort of regional or statewide groups of schools and libraries that typically apply together. Those that are eligible for support under the FCC's E-rate program, and tribal libraries eligible for support under the Library Services and Technology Act may request and receive support through the Emergency Connectivity Fund. Talk a little bit about the types of things that the fund's designed to support. So eligible equipment includes connected devices, laptops and tablet computers. Desktops and smartphones are not eligible for funding as part of the program. Wi-Fi hotspots, modems, including air cards, routers, and devices that combine a router and modem. And then in addition to equipment, there's support available for services. So commercially available fixed or mobile broadband internet access services. Dark fiber is not eligible for support, and construction of broadband networks and customer premises equipment for receiving data casting services are also ineligible, except in limited cases where there is no commercially available internet access service sufficient for students, school staff, and library patrons to engage in remote learning. So this is one of the reasons why we're talking about this with you today, is because we're in the middle of the first application window for this program. That application window opened on June 29th, and it closes in, I think, about 22 days on August 13th. It's important to note that during this initial application window, schools and libraries can apply for funding and support for services and equipment that is purchased between July 1st and June 30th, July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of 2022. You can learn more about the program itself. You can learn how you can apply for the program by visiting emergencyconnectivityfund.org. And you can also get some assistance with the application process or additional questions answered on the program by calling 800-234-9781. And that support is available Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can also visit the FCC's website for this program, which is fcc.gov/emergency-connectivity-fund. And on that page, we have a detailed FAQ that you can link to. You can learn more about program basics there. We've got a couple videos that help explain the program. I encourage you to familiarize yourself with the program and keep in mind that the initial application funding window, so you must apply for funding for this first round by August 13th, if that's something that you're interested in doing. I want to transition now to talk about the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. So the topic of the day. And this program differs from ECF in that instead of providing support for schools and libraries to be able to provide devices and connectivity to households, this program is designed to provide support directly to eligible households. So I'll cover what the benefit is, who's eligible, how households can apply, and provide an overview of the toolkit that the FCC has developed to aid partners, navigators, and others directly serving their communities in getting the word out about this important program. I'll share some websites where you can find more detailed information about the program. and who to contact if you have follow-up questions. And then we'll have an FAQ at the end where we can talk through some of the questions that you have right now as well. So as the acting chairwoman mentioned, broadband is no longer nice to have, it's need to have. And this program will allow students to connect to classrooms, individuals to work remotely, and it connects all of us to family, friends, telehealth services, and other critical resources. The benefit provides eligible households with up to a $50 a month discount for broadband services, including associated equipment rentals, such as a modem, up to a $75 a month discount for households on tribal lands, and a one-time discount of up to $100 for a laptop, desktop computer, or tablet purchased through a participating provider if the household contributes more than $10 and less than $50 towards that purchase price. It's important to note that the connected device must be provided by the same provider that the eligible household is receiving discounted broadband service from as part of the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. It's not a coupon or a rebate that can be used at a third-party retail store to buy a device. The Emergency Broadband Benefit is limited to 1 monthly service discount and 1 device discount per eligible household. It is not a direct-to-consumer benefit in the sense that it's not a check or a coupon that consumers would receive directly in the mail. It's a discount off the monthly service bill or device. So this will show up as a discount on the eligible household's monthly broadband bill. The service provider then seeks reimbursement directly from the program. So who's eligible? A household's eligible, and there's a number of ways that a household can qualify, but a household is eligible if a member meets one of the following criteria. So has an income that is at or below 135% of federal poverty guidelines, or participates in certain assistance programs such as SNAP, Medicaid, or Lifeline. And I'll talk a little bit more about Lifeline in a minute. If someone in the household received a Pell Grant in the current award year, if a student in the household has been approved to receive benefits under the free and reduced school lunch or breakfast program, including through USDA's community eligibility provision, and that's for both the 2019-2020 or 2020-2021 school years. If anyone in the household experienced a substantial loss of income due to a job loss or furlough since the end of February 2020, and the household has a total income in 2020 below $99,000 for single filers or $198,000 for joint filers, or if someone in the household meets the eligibility criteria for participating providers' existing low income or COVID-19 program. So you may be aware that certain providers had income-based broadband programs that predated the COVID-19 pandemic. So if someone in the household qualified for one of those, that would automatically qualify them for the emergency broadband benefit. Keep in mind that a member of the household must meet only one of the eligibility criteria, not all of those that I just mentioned to qualify. So you just need to meet one. You don't have to check all 5 boxes. Some of you may be familiar with Lifeline. Lifeline's a federal program that lowers the monthly cost of phone and internet services. Eligible customers get up to $9.25 or up to $34.25 if they live on tribal lands toward their bill. And you can learn more about this program at fcc.gov/Lifeline consumers. Current Lifeline participants are automatically eligible, and in most cases, they don't need to apply separately for the emergency broadband benefit, but they do need to select a provider and an eligible emergency broadband benefit plan in order to start receiving the monthly discount. Current Lifeline recipients cannot be auto-enrolled in the emergency broadband benefit by their current Lifeline provider. They do need to provide affirmative consent before they can be enrolled. And you can receive both the Lifeline and the emergency broadband benefit at the same time. They can be applied to the same qualifying service or separately to a Lifeline service and an emergency broadband benefit service with the same or different providers. So for example, an eligible household could have a Lifeline supported mobile phone service and a separate home broadband service that's supported through the emergency broadband benefit program. So I've said household a lot, and you might be wondering how we define household. A household is a group of people who live together and share money, even if they're not related to each other. So if you live together and share money, you're one household. If you either don't live together or do not share money, you may be considered two households for the program, for the purposes of the program. So if you think of roommates who might be splitting rent or other expenses, but are not sharing income, each of those roommates may qualify as a separate household in terms of meeting the program's definition. A household can qualify because of an eligible dependent child that meets the eligibility criteria. So for example, the school lunch program qualification criteria. And you may use a worksheet that's on the USAC website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that website in a minute. But that worksheet might be helpful in helping you with questions that you can answer to figure out if you're one or more households when it comes to program eligibility. So another thing to note about this program is that households within certain types of multi-unit dwellings are eligible and can receive the emergency broadband benefit. So if the household has a bill or other liability for their broadband access that someone such as a property owner or a school is helping to pay, the household could switch temporarily to using the emergency broadband benefit to pay for their broadband service instead of relying on that previously provided third-party support. In a situation like an apartment building, nursing home, or other multi-unit dwelling, the people in those types of living situations can also benefit from the program if they've been paying for internet service. So some portion of the bill is being charged to that individual. There is a way for them to get that offset using the emergency broadband benefit. And really the best thing to do in a situation like that is when a landlord or property manager is the account holder, that person should reach out to the participating provider to discuss how to get the process started for getting households within their multi-unit dwelling qualified and signed up so that they can start receiving the benefit. And you can learn more about how we define household and and that worksheet I mentioned before by visiting getemergencybroadband.org under Do I Qualify and What is a Household? So some additional details about the program. Enrollment began on May 12th. There are 3 ways to enroll, and we'll talk about those in a second. The Emergency Broadband Benefit is a temporary program developed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the program will end once the funds are exhausted or 6 months after the Department of Health and Human Services declares an end to the pandemic, whichever comes first. The program is administered by the Universal Service Administrative Company, or USAC. They also administer the Lifeline program and the Emergency Connectivity Fund, which we touched on briefly earlier. USAC hosts the online application portal and a consumer website at getemergencybroadband.org. And to date, there are over 3.75 million households enrolled in the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. I want to share some information about some important consumer protections that we also included when we developed the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. Participating providers must give a household notice about the last date or billing cycle that the full benefit will apply to their bill, and the date or billing cycle that a partial benefit will apply to their bill, in addition to information about the cost of broadband service after the program ends. Households will need to opt in or request to continue broadband services with their provider. If they don't opt in to continue receiving broadband service or select a new service plan with their provider, their broadband service will end once the program ends. And this is true even if they had service with that same provider before enrolling in the broadband benefit program. They will still need to opt in to continue services. We really want to avoid a bill shock situation where a family was getting, or a household was getting, a discount, and then they suddenly aren't getting the discount and have an unexpected balance due that may be accruing for a few months before they realize that they need to pay that balance. Eligible households can't be excluded based on prior debt with a participating provider, and consumers can change their benefit to a different participating service provider at any time. They're not locked into the company they first enroll with. However, the device discount can only be used once per eligible household, even if the household does change providers. A couple facts about some of the providers that are participating. There are over 1,100 providers across the country that are now participating. The program is open to all broadband providers that meet program requirements, not just those that were offering Lifeline before the program started. There are both fixed and mobile providers that participating in the program. And you can check with providers in your area to learn more about their plan, the plans they're offering on the program, and the eligible services they might have. You can find a list of participating providers by state and territory if you visit fcc.gov/broadband benefit, and you can click on the state you're in and see the list that's participating in that state. We also have check marks to indicate the providers that are providing a discount, the device discount as part of their participation in the program on that webpage. So there are 3 ways for households to apply for the emergency broadband benefit. One is to contact a participating provider directly to learn about their application process. Households can also go to getemergencybroadband.org to apply online. And Jamie's going to talk a lot more about that process here in a few minutes. And households can send in a mail-in application along with proof of eligibility to Emergency Broadband Support Center, PO Box 7081, London, Kentucky 40742. Many providers will be asking consumers to complete the online or mail-in application that I just mentioned, and it's available at getemergencybroadband.org. But some have received approval from the FCC to use their own alternative verification process to enroll eligible households in the program. And as librarians, as key sort of anchor institutions and touch points for your communities, many of you find yourself in the role of being a navigator for the patrons that you're helping. Navigators and other people who are helping eligible households to enroll need to keep in mind that when you're providing assistance, you need to be in person with the individual that you're providing assistance to. And this is because that person that is applying will need to sign and make certain attestations in the online portal or on the paper application as part of the enrollment process. So before I turn things over to Jamie to walk you through the online application, I do want to share some information about a toolkit that the FCC has developed. Heartland Forward also has a great toolkit that they've put together on this program, and I think both are great resources that you can make use of to find ways to promote this to your patrons and constituents in your area and just help your community become more aware of this important program. So this is a new and temporary program. We knew it was going to be critical to help folks understand the program and to be able to share clear and accurate information about the program in their communities. So the toolkit, it consists of social media items, printable items, video PSAs. Everything in the toolkit is meant to be taken, used, branded, co-branded. You can sort of modify things, put them in your voice. They're all designed to be printed out very easily. They work in color, grayscale. You can customize them with sort of localized information, maybe add a list of participating providers in your area to the back, and different things like that. So as I mentioned, there are logos, social media images, draft social media posts. We have some newsletter inserts and a draft press release that you can work from. For printables, we have a fact sheet, flyers, posters, a 9x5 info card, a 1/4 page handout, a larger format infographic that works great online or also can be used as a poster. We have videos in ASL. We have videos in English, Spanish. There's a how to apply video. There are radio PSAs and sort of audio format overviews that you can grab and make use of. There's a PowerPoint slide deck that's not too different than the one I've been sharing with you here today. And we also have things available in a number of languages and formats. And I apologize because Vietnamese seems to be cut through at the bottom of the slide. But let me sort of go through the languages that we do have materials available in. So we have most everything in the toolkit is available in English and Spanish. The fact sheet, 9x5 info card, and 1/4 page handout are also available in Arabic, Amharic, Burmese, traditional Chinese, French, Haitian Creole, Korean, Portuguese, Russian, Somali, Spanish, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. We're happy to fulfill any format requests for accessible formats, such as Braille or large print, they can be sent to 504@fcc.gov. So please take these materials. They're meant to be used by partners. As I said, customize them, make them work for the audiences that you're sharing information with, and in the format and style that best meets your needs. So I am now pleased to turn the virtual podium over to Jamie Gustafson. She is the Director of Outreach for the Universal Service Administrative Company, also known as USAC. And she currently leads USAC's training and communication efforts to ensure that eligible consumers, service providers, and others are aware of the various programs, including the Emergency Broadband Benefit and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And today, Jamie's going to walk us through the online and mail-in Emergency Broadband Benefit application process.
Thanks, Ed. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to walk you through the online application process, and we'll talk a bit about the paper application process as well. But I do want to sort of set the expectation that every question that we ask in the online portal is also mirrored on the paper form. So we're going to spend a lot more time on the online form, but if you're using the paper forms, you're going to get those exact same questions. Just as a reminder, you can get copies of those paper forms at getemergencybroadband.org. And when consumers want to apply for the emergency broadband benefit, they will start at getemergencybroadband.org and scroll down to the middle of the screen to the Apply Now button, which takes you directly into the online form. And these first 5 slides that I'm going to show you are a single screen. We just broke them up so they're a little bit easier to see, but this is all the first screen that consumers will see. So we'll ask consumers to share their full legal name, and that should be the name that they use on official documents. So not a nickname, not a, my first name is Joe, but I go by Sam. They should use the name that they would use on official documents. And then we also ask for their date of birth. Next, we'll ask for their home address. And this is important to know that this needs to be the address where they will receive service. So it cannot be a PO box. If consumers have another address where they receive mail, they can enter that a bit later. So we do need their home address here for any consumers who are, for example, experiencing homelessness or live in a group home situation. They can put the address of a place where they receive mail, or they can put a descriptive address. So if there is a specific place where they spend time, they can enter that information. We will, again, for people who put in a descriptive address that is not a home address, we would ask them to give us a mailing address later so that we are able to reach out to them. So for example, if there is a shelter or a place where they are receiving services, they can include that either as their home address or as a mailing address. As Ed talked about, this is a household benefit, so consumers can either apply themselves or they can qualify through a child or dependent. So we ask them to click the corresponding button. And then we'll talk about how the consumer wants to verify their identity. And there are 3 different ways that consumers can verify their identity. The first is to give us the last 4 digits of their social security number. Social security numbers are not required to participate in the Emergency Broadband Benefit program. But consumers who do give us those last 4 digits, if they have one, may have a bit of a quicker time through the application process because we will be able to run them through our online databases. Consumers can also choose to give us their tribal ID number if they have one, or consumers can choose to manually verify their identity. And they would do that by submitting a copy of their driver's license, a military ID, a passport, their taxpayer ID number, or another governmental ID. So on this portion of the screen, consumers will let us know how they want to verify their identity by checking the button next to the option they prefer, and then either giving us their last 4 digits of their social security number or their tribal ID number, or letting us know what document they'd like to submit to verify their identity, and then uploading a copy or a photo of that ID right here on the page. On the next screen, consumers will set up their account. So they'll choose a username and a password. And this is important because this will allow the consumer to go back into their account at any time. So if we need additional information from them, or we need them to submit documentation, or they want to check the status of their application, they will use that username and password. Next, they will submit their email address. If they would like to provide an alternate email address, so for example, if a consumer might not be as technologically literate, or they don't have easy access to their email address, they might want to put in a second email address will also receive updates about their account and their application. And they can do that by checking this small button behind or below the email address line. If the consumer has a telephone number and wants to share it with us, they have the option to do that. And then at the bottom of this screen, consumers who have a mailing address where they would like us to correspond with them via mail can check the box, and that will bring up another box where they can enter that mailing address. So again, it's not required, but for those consumers who do want to receive mail somewhere other than the address they provided, they can go ahead and do that. And then they will click submit to log into their account, and then they'll be brought to their dashboard. So you'll see in the middle of the screen, if the consumer already has an application in progress, they will see that. They'll be able to see the status of that application. So if they need to submit more documentation, it'll tell you right there in the middle of the screen. But since we are starting our first application on this screen, you would choose apply for emergency broadband, and that will take you back into the application process. So the next screen that they will find, we are going to ask the consumer to let us know what program or programs they would like to use to qualify for the program, for the Emergency Broadband Benefit program, or if they do not qualify through any of these government assistance programs, to let us know that they either qualify through income. If they qualify through a tribal specific program, they can go ahead and check that box, and it'll pull up a list of eligible tribal programs, so they can let us know that way. Or they can let us know that they are not in any of these programs, but their child or dependent is in one of those programs. And again, that will bring them to a screen where they can let us know what program their child or dependent participates in. Once they've given us that information, they will get this sort of check-in screen or this review screen, so they can double check that their name, birth date, last 4 digits of their social security number, or however they have chosen to verify their identity, are correct, and that their address is correct. So we do ask consumers to double check this just to make sure there aren't any typos or anything that might slow down their processing. Once they've confirmed that all that information is correct, the consumer will then check this box to give us permission to use their information to check their eligibility for the program. And once they do that and hit submit, we will then run that information against our electronic databases so that we may be able to verify that consumer's identity without having them submit any documentation if we can find them in our electronic databases. But in the case that we cannot either find them in our electronic databases, or we don't have enough information, consumers are able to correct any errors or provide additional documentation right in the National Verifier. So within the National Verifier, they can correct any address or duplicate errors. They can share identity documents. They can give us their eligibility documents if necessary. So I'm going to walk you through the process for correcting any of those errors or submitting any documents that may be needed. But I do want to just reassure everyone that most consumers only have 1 or maybe 2 places that they need to correct errors in their application. I'm just going to walk you through all of the possible errors that you may see, just so that you are familiar with how you correct those. But again, most consumers will not have to go through this entire process, and many won't have to go through it at all because we found them in our electronic databases. So the first thing that we may need to confirm is the consumer's address. So if we were not able to find their address in AMS, or they provided a descriptive address, the first thing that they'll do is use this mapping feature to help us find the latitude and longitude of their address. So using these plus minus buttons, they can zoom in, zoom in, zoom in until they can see on the map the location of their address, and then they can use the pin over here on the left-hand side to drop a pin on their address. And that will give us that consumer's latitude and longitude. Or if the consumer knows their latitude and longitude, we know that's probably not common for people living in urban areas, but maybe a little bit more common for consumers who are living in a heavily rural area. They can type in that information and go ahead and click next, and then they have corrected that address error. The second common error that we see is that there is more than one person receiving the EBB benefit at a residential address. And again, as Ed mentioned, this is a household benefit, but we do recognize that there could be more than one economic household living at the same physical address. So on this screen, consumers who we found to have multiple EBB recipients at the same address can answer a couple of questions, and we can find out if they are an independent economic household. So the consumer will answer these questions using the radial buttons, and this will determine if they are an independent economic household and are eligible for the benefit, or if they are considered part of the household with someone who is already receiving the benefit. So if their answers to the questions indicate that they are a separate economic household, they will then initial these three statements that say that they understand the program's rules, they understand that they are an independent economic household and are eligible for the program. And then the next error that some consumers may see is that we weren't able to find their eligibility in any of our databases. So in that case, they will choose the single program that they would like to use to qualify for the program. And then they can either, in the case of this example, we're showing the USDA Community Eligibility Provision School drop-down menu. But if the consumer wants to submit documentation such as a Medicaid card or a letter saying that they qualify for SNAP benefits, they'll be able to do that through this screen. So they'll have the option to upload a copy of that documentation into our system. And then that will be sent to the Emergency Broadband Support Center for review and approval of that application. So once the consumer has gone through sort of the process, so whether we were able to find them in our eligibility databases, or once they've corrected their errors, then the consumer will need to sign and initial a series of certifications. And as Ed mentioned, this is why consumers need to be in person if you are supporting them through the application process, because you as a library staff can help a consumer through the whole application up to this point. At this point, the consumer does need to initial and sign themselves, so no one else can do that on their behalf. So the consumer will go through and put their first and last initial in each of these certifications, and then electronically sign, so type their name, and then they do check this box that says that they understand that a digital signature is the equivalent of a paper signature. And then again, in the case that we needed to check documents, the consumer will get this screen, and it lets them know that we're checking their documents. It may take a little bit of time. Has a link to our website. The consumer can choose to stay on this page and wait for it to update, or if they want to sign out and go and do something else, they can always log back into their account and see that their account has updated. But they will also receive an email once we have completed their application. And at that point, consumers get their success screen. So this lets them know that they have qualified for the program and that it's time to sign up with a service provider. We have a variety of links in this document so the consumers can use the link to find an internet company near them. They can do that either by city or state, or search by discount. If they are looking to receive the device benefit, they can use the indicated link to find that list that Ed was talking about of service providers that are offering the device benefit. For those consumers who live on tribal lands and want to receive that enhanced tribal benefit, they can use this blue button to confirm their tribal qualification. So again, that will bring up a map where they just scroll in and drop a pin to indicate their address, and it will let them know if they do in fact qualify for that enhanced tribal benefit. And then the last thing to know about your success screen is it does provide your application ID, the consumer's full legal name as they submitted it to the program, their address as they submitted it to the program, and the last 4 digits of their social security, or I'm sorry, let me take a step back. It will let them know how they prove their identity. So it will either let them know that they used the last 4 digits of their social security number, used a tribal ID, or that they submitted alternate identity verification. And the reason that this box is helpful is that a service provider may ask these questions when they are enrolling the consumer. So to make it as easy as possible for the consumer to enroll, we do encourage them to keep this either a screenshot of this screen or a printout. This information will also come to them via email. They're not required to show it to a service provider. They can just go to a service provider and give them their information to enroll in the program. But having this information can make it a little bit easier. It can just stop sort of the information mismatch when they are enrolling in the program. So that was the process for filling out the application online. For those consumers who do choose to fill out a paper application, we're going to collect the exact same information as I said at the beginning. And there are a few tips that we encourage. So again, these are not required, but they will make your processing go more smoothly and more quickly. And we really encourage it, especially because it is a limited time benefit. And those tips are to write clearly using capital letters and black ink. And that is because we are then able to digitally scan those applications versus them having to be processed by a person. We encourage them to submit an email address if they have one available. And that again is just for the speed of processing. We will mail them back information about their application. But if they were able to submit an email address, we are able to communicate via email, which means if we need more documents from them, we can get that more quickly. They can find out that their application was approved more quickly, and they don't have to rely on sort of the postal service, which we know can be slow, and especially in some parts of the country. And the other thing that we encourage consumers to do if they send in the paper application is to include copies of their eligibility and identity documents, as well as a copy of the Independent Economic Household Worksheet. All of those are available at getemergencybroadband.org. And again, we will process applications that don't have those. It just reduces the processing speed because if we need additional documentation, if they have it in that initial package, then we don't have to do any back and forth with the consumer before we can approve that application. And then I know Ed has mentioned a couple of resources. I just wanted to put those up on the screen as well. So Get Emergency Broadband is your resource for both the online and the paper application, as well as all sorts of consumer-facing information about the program. And then again, fcc.gov/broadband benefit is a great place to find all of those consumer resources that Ed just walked through. So I am going to turn it back over to Angie for questions.
Thank you, Jamie. This is actually Abby from the Heartland team. We've got quite a few questions that have come in the Q&A, so I'll try to group some of these together. I think one question that's been asked a few times is how long is it expected that the benefit is going to be available?
I'm happy to jump in on this one and provide some scenarios. So specific to the emergency broadband benefit, there are two ways that the program will come to an end. The first is that the funds, which again is $3.2 billion, when they run out, or the second scenario would be 6 months after the Department of Health and Human Services declares an end to the pandemic. So in the first scenario, it's a little less time constrained, right? There's sort of not a definitive window, but the program rules do provide that the provider must tell the customer, the household, that the program is ending. They must let them know how much their service will cost after the program has ended. And in the other scenario, obviously, we would have a 6-month window to let people know that the program will be winding down and coming to an end.
Thanks, Ed. There are also a couple questions about the timeline here. One is asking the average length of time to complete the application, and then also how long does it usually take before an applicant is approved?
I can take that. So in terms of completing the application, if you're doing it through the online portal, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes. It can be quicker if the consumer sort of has all of the information right there available, but it is about 5 screens to get through to complete that application. And in terms of how long it takes to receive an approval for the program, that varies. It can be almost instantaneous. So if that consumer is able to be verified using our online databases, we are able to provide an almost real-time response. If the consumer does need to submit documentation, they should find out, it can take a little bit more time. They should find out within 48 hours at most. And again, they will get that information via either email or by logging back into the system. And the sort of biggest variance in terms of how long it takes if they need to go through that manual review process is how long it takes the consumer to provide that additional documentation. So again, that sort of 48 hours is once we receive that consumer's documentation, then we will get them in a response within that 48-hour period. But if it takes them a while to get us their documentation, that can increase that timeline.
Thanks. And we have a couple questions asking again how to assist individuals who may be experiencing homelessness or do not have a permanent home address.
Sure, I can speak to that. So for consumers who may be experiencing homelessness or don't have a fixed address, they can give us the address of, for example, if they frequently come to a library to receive mail or update on their services, they could use the library's address as the address for where they will receive service. They will probably have to then fill out that independent economic household because if more than one consumer uses that same address. But they could also choose to use a relative's address. They could choose to use a shelter or other location where they are receiving services. Or if they had a descriptive address, so a place where they normally stayed. So for example, in some cities, you may see that there is a tent city where they may spend much of their time. And they can use the descriptive address. So they could give us, for example, cross streets and use that as their address to apply for the program.
Thank you. There was a question about if people with a felony or people who are on parole are disqualified from participating.
Ed may be able to speak to this more than I can, but my understanding is we don't do any checks that would prevent that.
That's correct. We don't check for those sorts of things specifically. I think depending on their living situation, they may need to provide, the household worksheet. But other than that, I don't think there'd be any complications for them enrolling.
Great. And a question regarding college students, if a student is living off campus, who's eligible, who fills out the application? Is it the parent or the student?
So if the consumer or the student is 18, which I guess in many cases they would be as a college student, then they could apply on their own behalf. So if, for example, they were receiving a Pell Grant in the current award year, then the consumer, the student themselves could fill out that application.
Great. Also on eligibility, are undocumented immigrants or refugees able to apply?
Yes, so there are a number of ways to show proof of identity, and it's not restricted to having a social security number. So if they have a driver's license, other government issued documents that they can upload and show that and use those to prove their identity, then they can apply for the program.
Great. And a couple regarding language and translation. One question is the online form available in other languages, or is it just the promotional materials?
So that's a really good question. So the online form, the online application and the paper application are both available in both English and Spanish. And then we do have guides to walk consumers through the application in a number of other languages, I think 8 other languages. And those guides are available at getemergencybroadband.org. And again, that will walk you step by step through the application process because it is just available in English and Spanish.
Thank you. And for households who qualify because their children qualify, when they're applying, do they use their own, the adult social security number and ID, or do they use the child's?
So the adult who is applying will use their social security number, their ID information. And then because they have chosen that they are qualifying through a child or dependent, they'll receive another screen where they put that child or dependent's information. So the person who is actually, we are using their qualifying information. So the answer to that is sort of both. We will collect both people's information, but on the main screen of the application and sort of that first screen you see, they would use the adult who is applying because individuals under 18 are not eligible to apply on themselves for the program unless they are a legally emancipated minor.
One question here. They have run into problems with service providers when the applicant is not supposed to use a public computer for the application process. How do you recommend navigating that?
So I'm not aware of any program restrictions that would prevent an applicant from using a public computer. I think that, you know, in this age of identity theft and cybersecurity focuses, you'd want to make sure that you were doing that in a sensible way and closing out browsers and, you know, sort of preventing the information from being retained. But service providers who are flagging that as an issue, I feel like that's something you should bring to our attention, and I'd welcome you to help that individual or have that individual directly file a complaint with the FCC. And that's consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. And I'll put that in the chat as well. It's consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. I'd be interested to hear, you know, more specifics about that situation.
Another question that sort of relates to providers. You mentioned that a customer cannot use a device credit more than once. Are there protections that prevent providers from selling locked devices to participants that require them as the access point for broadband?
So when I think of locked devices, it's typically in the context of a cell phone. And both programs that we discussed today do not include cell phones as included devices. Laptops and desktops, I'm not really aware of those traditionally being locked, but if that's a scenario that others are seeing or are aware of, I would definitely want that brought to our attention. Again, consumercomplaints.fcc.gov. I don't believe that the program rules specifically speak to this, but I think that because this is focused on laptops, desktops, and certain tablet devices, that wasn't perceived to be an issue.
Okay, we have a few questions about the ECFs. I'm going to transition to those a minute. One question is the fund for devices that specifically need to be used outside of the library?
So the goal of the program is really to support unmet needs in education. So the goal is for those to be devices that that patrons are using for educational purposes. And Ed may be able to speak to this a bit more. I think with libraries, it's a little bit murkier because students may be doing educational activities sort of within the library. I can say that on the school side of things, they are specifically for students used primarily outside of the school location. And I believe that is also the intent, but I think it's a little bit murkier for library devices.
Just confirming that it is intended for off-campus use, and that's for students, teachers, library patrons, and that pertains to either the school or the library scenario, where the school or the library is the provider of the device and the connectivity services.
And on a related note, do families that homeschool qualify? Are they covered here?
So families that homeschool, I think, could participate in each of these programs potentially in a couple ways. So one would be the Emergency Broadband Benefit. If the household itself qualifies under any of the 5 criteria that we listed, that household could participate in this program. To the extent that a homeschooled individual was part of a school consortium that was eligible for E-rate, they may be able to work with that consortia to apply for the Emergency Connectivity Fund. And I think those are the two different, EBB, if the household qualifies, they should be good to go. The homeschooling for Emergency Connectivity Fund may be a little bit of a more unique set of circumstances, and they would definitely want to talk to their homeschool consortium to find out more.
And I believe this question is related to the ECF application. The question is there a difference between school staff and library staff, or are they the same?
So in terms of sort of the rules around the program, the FCC doesn't make a lot of distinction between school staff and library staff, but again, it is intended for educational purposes. So to the degree that the library staff was participating in primary and secondary education services offsite out of the library, then that would be eligible within sort of the confines of the program.
Going back to EBB, there's a question about the American Library Association and FCC discussing some questions around impact on patrons' privacy. I don't know if there are any updates at the moment on those discussions.
So I think I want to make it clear that that is specific to the Emergency Connectivity Fund, not the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And in the Emergency Connectivity Fund, there's a requirement that libraries and schools both maintain records of who has the equipment and services that are being provided through Emergency Connectivity Fund funding. So when the laptop that was paid for using emergency connectivity funds is checked out, either for a short period of time or for a long period of time, there are records requirements there. I know that there are active discussions going on between the ALA and the team at the FCC who created the program rules. The requirement itself is based around concerns and FCC responsibilities to ensure that waste, fraud, and abuse aren't occurring for funding programs like this. I'm not on that team personally. I can't really provide an update right now, but I do want to make it clear that that's specific to the Emergency Connectivity Fund, not the Emergency Broadband Benefit.
Got it. I realize we are well over our hour mark here. I think we've gotten to most of the questions. I would invite people to go ahead and reach out to the Heartland Forward team if there are things we didn't get to, and we're happy to facilitate answers. We'll also be following up with some of the resources that have been mentioned and added in the chats here. Ed, any closing thoughts from you?
Sure. I do just want to thank everybody again for taking the time to join us today. These are two significant programs that are directly designed to provide access in a time of critical need for students, households, library patrons, and you guys are such an important touch point in helping to spread the word, helping people to navigate assistance programs like this. And just being a resource. So I'm really appreciative of you taking the time today. It's great that we're going to be able to follow up and share again a number of the links that we've included and the different websites you can visit to learn more about these programs. We've got a lot of videos that go into a lot of detail. So if you missed something today, if you didn't have a question answered, specifically with the Emergency Connectivity Fund, there's some deep dive videos and training videos available on the USAC website, which we added in the chat, but will also be sent as a follow-up resource. And also I encourage everyone to stay in touch. We want to hear from you. These programs are important. We're open to feedback if there are things that you think aren't working, or if there are things that you think are working and you've got some success stories you want to share about the positive impact these programs are having. We want to hear that too. So please do stay in touch, reach out. On each of those web pages, there are ways to contact us related to each of the programs. So if you've got follow-up questions, in addition to working with Heartland Forward, you can also reach out directly to the FCC. And just thanks for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And on screen are some of those resources we referenced, and we'll be following up with emails. Thank you, everyone.